Today is day 2 of Unit 7, our unit on factoring. Yesterday we factored using the GCF method. Once we get to the end of the unit, you guys will see that that should always be your first thing you're looking for, is when you have a polynomial that you're trying to factor, you always want to look and see if you could take a GCF out. And then you might be able to use some of the other methods that we are going to talk about in the rest of the lesson. So hopefully you are correcting your work as I'm talking. This is your work that you had yesterday. Okay. If you are not taking out a high enough GCF, you might have something different than me inside your parentheses. It's not technically wrong, it's just not done all the way. What I wanted to point out was number 10. I'm sure a lot of you noticed to take pi out, but make sure you didn't overlook that r. Okay, so with a lot of these, make sure you're taking out the complete GCF. Another one I wanted to go over was number 15. That one, I know there was a lot of coefficients and variables. So just make sure that you did take out the entire GCF, which was 7r squared s squared. And you might have noticed your final answer had a 3 minus 2 in it. Make sure you don't actually simplify that into a 1, because remember our goal is we always want to get back to where we started. Those would be equal to each other, they would be equivalent, but that's just not what we're looking for what we are doing. Okay, we want to always make sure we can get back to our original answer. Alright, so today what we are going to do is we are going to be working with trinomials with a leading coefficient of 1. So let me, before we do the do now, let me just explain what that means. Okay. So when we have our trinomial, okay, this is always going to be in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. It's always going to be something like that, okay? Remember when we are in standard form, now this is a quadratic trinomial. We'll do a couple different ones, so bear with me on this. So the leading coefficient would be a, okay, in this example. So our x squared is always going to be a 1. So a, b, and c, those are our, well, let me say, okay, so ax squared plus bx plus c. So a and b are coefficients, and c is going to be a constant. Okay, remember that has no variable attached to it. Okay, so again, this value right here we're going to work with is just going to be equal to 1. Okay, so the leading coefficient, remember this is in standard form. Okay, so the leading coefficient is always going to be a 1. Okay, and remember, in order to have your leading coefficient, it needs to be in standard form. So your leading coefficient is just that. It's the coefficient that comes first when it is in standard form. So before, remember I told you that this chapter is literally the opposite of what we just got done doing. So this might have been an answer. This might be a question that we got last chapter. We would use, remember, FOIL or double distribution. Okay, so the first would be 4x squared. The outer would be 10x. The inner would be positive 10x. And the last would be negative 25. So if you notice, these cancel, so I'm just left with 4x squared minus 25. Okay? So remember, now this will be what we start with to get back to there. Okay, so again, just a couple more examples. This is just going to get you thinking about what your final answers should look like. Okay, so again, I'll use FOIL or double distribution. So first, first, outer, inner, last. So y squared minus 10y plus 9. Okay, and one more. So n squared plus 2n minus 3n minus 6. Sorry if you can hear that construction. Okay, so what I first want you to notice, all right, Alright, so a trinomial, we know, is 3 terms. Okay, 3 terms in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so exactly what I just started talking about. So the leading coefficient. Alright, so what we are going to do, so the sum of the last 2 terms in the parentheses is the b. Okay? So if you look back up to, well, I'll do this in a minute. Okay, the product of the last 2 terms is the C. Sorry, that's kind of close, but okay, so the C and then the B. All right, so this literally probably sounds like gibberish, but let me go one step further. And again, once we get to our examples, I promise it will make more sense. Okay, so since factoring is just reverse multiplication, we can say these 2 steps. Okay, so when we are factoring something that looks like this, so we are factoring a trinomial where a, or our leading coefficient, is 1. Okay, so we are going to find 2 numbers that add to b and multiply to c. Okay, so we're going to have our sum and our product. Okay, so we're going to make some P and S charts, I'm going to call them. Okay, so place them in parentheses in the blanks. So think of yesterday when we pulled out the GCF, whatever was left over, that goes in parentheses. So remember I told you that for most of these, or for all of these rather, when you are factoring, you should always have parentheses in your answer. Okay. Okay, so then so you're always going to start with your x and your x, all right, or whatever your variable is. So if your variable is a y, that will be a y and a y, okay? And then plus would be for a positive number, and minus would be for a negative number. So I'm going to go through some ways you can figure out those in advance, okay? So please make sure you're listening for those. All right, so our first one we have is x squared plus 5x plus 6. So a is 1, b is 5, and c is 6. So I want to find 2 numbers that add to 5 and multiply to 6. Okay, that's what I want to find. So if you wanted to do something like this, so again, our P is going to have to, so our product has to be 6, and our sum has to be 5, okay? So again, all you're going to do, the other thing is these are both adding, so you know both of your products are going to be plus, okay? So we're going to say plus and plus, okay? And then this equals a plus, a positive. Okay, so let's think of some of these. So 1 and 6, okay, that would multiply to 6, but if we add them together, that equals 7, so that doesn't work. 2 and 3, that equals to 5, so that works. So here's what we do. So these are our products that go into our factors, okay? So I'm going to get an x with an x. They're both positive, and then I have a 2 and a 3. And then remember, you can always check. I told you this yesterday. You can always check with FOIL. Okay, so x squared plus 3x plus 2x plus 6. So again, this is our check. So 5x plus 6, so that does work. So this is in fact our answer. Okay, let's do another one. Okay, so that is when we have two positives. Okay, so if it's a positive, both of our factors are going to be positive. Okay, now I have a y squared. Okay, so a is 1, b is negative 8, and c is 12. Okay, so we need to find two numbers that add to negative 8 and multiply to 12. Okay, so what I'm going to show you, so this right here says both are the same sign. Okay? This says the sign is negative. Okay, so let's talk about that after. So we have our P&S chart. I need to multiply to a positive 12, and I need to add to a negative 8. So what this means is we're going to have two minuses so that we can get a negative. Okay, so let's see, negative 1 and negative 12, that would get me a negative 13, so that doesn't work. Negative 2 and negative 6 would come next. That's negative 8, so that works. All right, so again, now I'm going to put my two parentheses. Now they're both going to be a y. Okay, both are negative. And then it does not matter if you put 2 or 6 next, you will get the same thing every time. Okay, and again, if you did want to check, you would get y squared minus 6y minus 2y plus 12, because negative times negative. Okay, so y squared minus 8y plus 12, so that does work. And again, you don't have to do that every time, but I mean, you did all that work, so you might as well check your answer. Okay, so when the leading coefficient is 1, we want to always ask ourselves what numbers add to the middle term and multiply to the last term. Okay, I know I've been saying that, but I gotta keep saying it. Okay, these are exactly the same. Okay, so again, this means same sign. This means both negative. Okay, so I have a 1, negative 6, and 9. I need to add to negative 6 and multiply to 9. So whenever we're trying to find these, again, notice I'm putting the p first. Okay, we don't want to work backwards from the sum to do the product. That's just too hard, okay? There's so many more numbers that you can add than your factors. Not always, of course, but it just is a little bit easier if you do it this way. So I know both have to be negative so that my sum can be negative. And this is 6. Okay. All right, so factors of 9. So negative 1 and negative 9. Also, you don't have to do this chart every time. If you can do this in your head, more power to you. Okay, negative 3 and negative 3 equals a, oh, that should be a negative 6. Okay, so a negative 6, so that works. Okay, so I get r. So r minus 3, minus 3. Okay, so you could either write r minus 3, or remember you can write that as a squared. Okay, and then again you could check to make sure that it does work. So I would get r squared minus 3r plus 9, because negative times negative, and combine like terms, so that does work. Okay, so again, one more. So now I have something a little bit different, okay? So when I have this, this means different signs for the product, okay? And this means the larger factor is positive. Let me talk about that in a minute, okay? Okay, so we have the product and the sum. Remember, the product is always going to be the C value, so this will be negative 36. I know one is positive, one is negative. And then my sum is a positive 9. Now, what we are going to do, so I'm going to skip 1 and 36. I know that will never get me there. Okay.
Could you come to the main office or contact the main office? Carol Conley, if you're in the building. Thank you.
Okay. So, again, I'm going to tell you, so the larger number is going to be positive and the smaller number is going to be negative. When we are adding, remember that whatever the larger one is, that one's always going to get the sign, okay? So, let's think about this. So I have, let's try 4 and 9. So I'll do a positive 4 and a negative, a positive 9 and a negative 4, okay? So 9 plus negative 4, that would actually get me a 5. So that's close, but that's not it. So let's try 12 and negative 3. Okay, again, remember, one is going to be each because they are a product, and you have to have different signs to have a negative product. Okay, negative 12 and positive 3, that would, when I add them, get me a negative number. So when I add 12 and negative 3, that gets me a positive 9, so that's definitely my answer. Okay, so I'm working with C's. Okay, so I'm going to do C's in my parentheses. Okay, so it's a positive 12, so it will be a plus 12 and a minus 3. Okay, and that would be my answer. So let me just show you to make sure. So if I were to FOIL, I would get C squared minus 3C plus 3C minus 36. So C squared plus 9C minus 36, which is what we started with. Okay, so notice that what we are trying to do with finding our factors is we're trying to get this middle step. Okay, this is what is missing when we are going back and forth between factoring and then foiling. We're missing that middle step. So by breaking it apart into with our product and sum chart, we're figuring out what that middle step is. All right, so now we're going to get through 6 questions, and then the next 6 questions will be your homework. Okay, so I see that this means that they are going to be the same sign. Okay, so the same sign, and they need to add up to negative 5. Okay. Okay, so the product needs to be 6, and the sum needs to be negative 5. So my factors are going to be both negative. Okay, so I'm going to have a negative 2 and a negative 3. So minus 2, minus 3, there's my answer. Okay, next one. This means they are both different, so I'm going to have a positive and a negative. This means that we're going to have a larger, the larger will be positive. Okay, so again, my product, I'll make a little chart for this one, is going to be a negative 5. And
Hopkins, if you're in the building, please contact the main office.
Sum will be
please
4.
Contact the main office. Thank you.
Okay, so this means that the larger one is going to be positive. So the only thing we have would be a negative 1 and a positive 5. That will in fact get us 4. Okay, so y minus 1 and y plus 5. All right, these mean everything's positive in the next one. Okay, so we need to find the product of 20 That adds to 9. I hope you're all thinking 4 and 5, because that does work. X plus 4 and x plus 5. All right, so now we have some negatives. Actually, let's do this one because that one's also easy. Okay, both are positive, so we need a product for 25 whose sum is 10. I hope you're all thinking 5 times 5, because that's right. Okay, so x plus 5 times x plus 5. Okay, so now when we have negatives, this is the only one we haven't talked about. So this means that the product, one will be positive, one will be negative. This means the larger factor is negative. Okay, so my product is negative 2. Okay, and my sum is negative 1. Okay, so 2 and 1 are the only ones that we have. So the 2 will be negative, this will be positive, so negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1, that works. Okay, so this will be x minus 2, x plus 1. Okay, again, refoil and you will get the right answer. Okay, sorry for that. No, I'm not really sorry. Alright, so this is a negative 18, alright, and then again, the larger one will get the sign, okay, and the sum needs to be negative 7. So, let's see, how about 2 and 9? The larger one will be negative, so 9 will be negative. Okay, so I get a negative 7, that does work. So x plus 2, x minus 9. Okay, the next 6 questions are for homework, or classwork if you have time, homework if you do not. So please make sure you go through these. I know that this is not easy, so please ask for help as I walk around. Okay, so these are the 6 questions. Do all of these. Okay, notice the positive and negatives. I did not give you any negative. We'll work more on that tomorrow.